Good morning, everybody. I'm Debbie Cash, Vice Chair of Car Professional Development Master Group, and I'm welcoming everybody to our May Latte and Learn. This session is focused on manufactured and modular housing, and our guest speaker today is Randy Grumbine. Randy Grumbine is in his 7th year as Executive Director of the Virginia Manufactured and Modular Housing Association. He came to this position after a 21-year career with Clayton Homes as a salesperson, manager, and district manager, mostly in the Roanoke area. He holds a Master of Business Administration from Drexel University and a Master of Landscape Architecture from Virginia Tech. He serves on various advisory boards, including Virginia Housing Rural Housing Advisory Board and DHCD Housing Technology Innovation Board. So with that, Randy, I'm turning this over to you.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and welcome everyone. Hope this session will be informative to you. I'm going to throw a lot at you in rapid fire fashion. So if there's something that you see that you would like clarified, please feel free to raise your hand and let's address it at that time. If it's something that I will get to down the road, I'll tell you so, and then we'll cover it later in the session. And I will leave a little bit of time at the end for question and answer. So if your question is outside the scope of the current topic, you can hold that till the end and we'll address it then. So let's get rolling. So today we're going to talk first about nomenclature, get you familiar with that. We'll go through some industry data, how you identify the difference in the products, talk about foundations and permanent foundations and what they are, the conversion process, appreciation, depreciation, and then we'll cover some resale. So that's a lot to cover. So we're going to move through this quickly and at times, and then slowly at times as well. So the nomenclature. So as you all know, there's a lot of different terms out there that people use for factory built housing. This is why I have a job, really, because
pay attention to this if you're going to do what you're going to be doing.
So we see lots of different terms used, and we'll cover the definitions of all these rather quickly here in a minute. But this is really something that's important for you to understand the differences when you're out on the streets. So let's get rolling with these. The industry truly evolved from the travel trailer industry. They were small homes that you pulled behind your car and you parked them, and that's where you made home. Over time, the houses got bigger and bigger, and they got so big that you couldn't pull them with your own car anymore. So then they became a little bit more permanent, and they were truly mobile homes. The problem is they weren't built to any code whatsoever. So it was kind of the wild, wild west with construction. My recommendation is any of the homes that were built in this era, you need to avoid, or you at least need to have significant disclaimers in your contracts. Land only is fine if the house is on there, but I would make no representations as to the habitability of the home. As you see these out there still on the landscape, and you know it's an issue that the industry is trying to deal with. So those would be considered mobile homes or trailers. Then in 1976, legislation was passed actually prior to that, and took place effective in June of 1976, which became the term of manufactured home. So then we had single wides and double wides that were now built to a federally mandated code. So then the thinking was we needed to have a code that was recognized across the country, because the homes were mobile. They could be built in one state and transported to another, that all the homes should be built to the exact same code with a few exceptions. And those exceptions are wind wind zones, insulation zones based on the region that you're in, and then snow load is the third top issue that can affect the construction of the home. So that will be based on where the home is located. It has to meet those requirements. So Virginia is in the most stringent of insulation codes. So we're in thermal zone 3, and majority of the state is in wind zone 1, which is the least stringent. There is a small strip along the shoreline that is wind zone 2. It requires some additional tie downs on the house and some additional structure on the home itself. So much like the Virginia building code, the HUD code does update. So obviously today's homes aren't like those that were built in the 1976 region. The only problem is that the HUD code is not as regular. Like the Virginia building code is like clockwork. Every 3 years, you're updating your building code in Virginia. The HUD code doesn't have a regular cadence to it, but they do go through the process of updating the code and bringing in latest technologies to be released so that the homes can stay current with building technologies and with new products. So they just recently did a big release, which is going to include things like tankless water heaters, roll-in showers. Also, we'll actually be able to build townhouse manufactured homes. And that's kind of hard to wrap your brain around, multi-family manufactured homes, but they will be coming with this next release. So moving away from manufactured, we have the modular world. And modular, we see both on-frame and off-frame mods. There are still a few jurisdictions in Virginia that don't allow on-frame mods, but that is just really us getting them to be aware that there really is no difference and working with DHCD to get that removed. So you may see that from time to time in local jurisdictions, but for the most part, a modular is a modular. So the modulars are built to the state building code. And so wherever you have a vacant piece of land, if you were going to build on that modular home is constructed in the factory to the exact same code as that lot would require if you were going to build on it. The difference is it's just built in a factory and shipped in pieces and put together finally on site. So now, of course, we have all these other terms to throw at you. We have ADUs, park models, tiny homes, panelized. They're all built to a code. It's just a matter of which code are they following. So some examples here is a couple tiny houses that you see where all the rage recently. And now these homes are now, Virginia has adopted Appendix Q in the Virginia Building Code. And so what that says is basically Department of Housing Community Development said, if you want to build a tiny home, if your jurisdiction allows them, then this is the code that it has to be built to. They're not saying they're allowed statewide. That's a local decision. But if a locality decides to allow tiny homes in, then there is a code for those to now follow to make sure that they're built to the standards that is in the code book. And basically it is in my opinion, is a modified modular building code. So I hope that clears that up for you. There's another kind of home. Well, you also see some ADUs. That's the same idea. They have to be built to the specifications of that site, of that lot. And then we have one last kind, which would be called park models. And these are a different character altogether. They're actually built to the RV code. So the same code that constructs trailers and RVs. the same code applies to these park models. There is not much zoning in Virginia for park models. You'll find them mostly in a campground kind of setting. So if you have like a KOA or something like that, you might find park models in that jurisdiction. So I hope that clears up all that, but just in case it didn't, the industry introduced a new product a couple years ago called a CrossMod. And we really made things complicated with this term, but because it is truly a manufactured home. It's HUD coded, it's built to the HUD code. It has some specific requirements though. This would be a typical look of a CrossMod. So it comes with a HUD label on it. So it is built to the national HUD code. But it does have some requirements such as it has to have a higher pitched roof. It has to have a covered front porch, attached garage or carport. The house has to be set low to the ground, has to have finished sheetrock inside, real wood cabinets. And basically the thinking was a home is a home. So that's where they're trying to go with this product. I won't get into all the details unless we have time at the end to explain kind of how this evolved. But what the finishes and features you see here can be common on any of the homes that we're doing today. But the CrossMod must have these things. Real wood cabinets is another requirement. So the idea is to make these homes fit in more with the other homes in the neighborhood so that it's indistinguishable from the other houses, that it doesn't look like, oh, there's a double wide. So that was the thinking. It does have some special financing to go along with it. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac both have products to back this particular product. And a unique thing about the product is the appraisal process. So this was one of the homes that was taken last year to Homes on the Hill. So that's a CrossMod right there on that valuable piece of land, set up for HUD's innovation. What was called HUD's Innovation of Housing Showcase, which took place in June of last year. There'll be another one this June, but from what I'm understanding, it's only going to have one house this year. So sometimes it's very difficult to work with the National Park Service. They get real particular about their space there. So we'll let those parties work that out. But this is Teresa Payne, who she's the National Director of HUD over manufactured housing. So just a quick sidebar, is kind of unique that the people that regulate the industry have very little knowledge about the product itself. Not so much Teresa and her staff, but the folks that are a little bit further down on the ladder. A lot of them have never been in manufactured homes. So when we had this house here on the mall, and they came out and they saw it, they said, wow, I had no idea this was today's manufactured housing. So, but the one of the things that I was saying is unique about the appraisal part on these CrossMods is it requires the appraiser to use as comps other CrossMod homes. And if there aren't enough CrossMods to use, it then says you must use 2 or more site-built homes in your appraisal. They do not want you using the standard double wide because it's not the same product. It's more like a site-built home than a double wide. So that's very significant. It's significant for the industry to kind of move in this direction to where we get to a home is a home, and let's just recognize them as such. The last thing I will touch on is multifamily. We don't see a lot of this in Virginia, but there is some. So this is a modular unit, and that would be the floor plan. It's actually built in 2 boxes. to give a townhouse kind of a feel to it. It can help drive the cost down a little bit. And this would be another one where you're loading on the front. And this is what will be coming to the manufactured home code here shortly with the next release. And this is you can go higher with the modular products up to about 5 stories. And this project here is in Fishersville. It's a senior living. It's called the Gateway Center. It's right across from the hospital in Fishersville. So that's all built in a factory, shipped and assembled on site in boxes. So that just gives you a little bit sense of the scope of the industry that we deal with here. Teresa, are there any questions before I move on?
There's one question. What's the difference between on-frame and off-frame modulars?
Okay, excellent question. And we will get to that here shortly. I'll just go ahead and talk about that right now. So manufactured homes all have a frame on them, a chassis. That's part of the actual description in the HUD code. So it's a steel frame. The house is built on the frame and then shipped at the site. The wheels and axles and the hitch are removed, but that frame stays on it. The modular is basically the same, but it can be on frame or off frame. So sometimes it's built on that frame and the frame stays with it at the site, and sometimes it's lifted off of the frame with a crane and sat on a permanent foundation. So that's the difference in the two. It really, the reason that some jurisdictions don't want to have, don't allow for on-frame mods is basically they're scared that you're going to sneak in a manufactured home on them. They know if it doesn't have a frame, it's a modular, but there's other ways to identify them, which we'll go through shortly, to clarify that for you so that you can be armed to know the difference. But in a nutshell, that's the difference. The home's entirely the same, except one's built on a frame, the other one is built off. So the only thing that could change is your floor joists. If you have a steel cage underneath it, you don't need 2x10s or 2x12s, depending on the span. You can get by with 2x8s, or in some cases even 2x6s. So just briefly hit you with some data so you can understand the scope of the industry, both nationwide and in Virginia. In 2021, 88% of the homes constructed under 200,000 were manufactured homes, and then 97% if it was under 150,000. So you can kind of see where the market fits today. And nationwide, we did 112,000 homes last year, and in Virginia we did about 1,200. That ranks us right in the middle of the pack, about 24th in the nation. And we were down slightly last year, and we're starting this year, as you can imagine, down a little bit, but I think we're going to be pretty resilient, just because as prices climb and rates climb, people tend to go to a little bit more affordable. So we sometimes see that the market doesn't affect us like it does some of the site builders. So it would be interesting to see how the rest of the year plays out. Just want to talk to you now about identifying homes. How do you know the difference? And so I'd ask you, which one's manufactured and which one's modular? And the truth of the matter is, I can't even tell by looking at it from the street. So it really depends on the code that the home is built to. And I use this as an example to kind of drive this home. The person on the street has an image of what is modular or what is manufactured. They have their impressions. The consumer, Debbie mentioned that I was in retail with Clayton for years, and when the consumers would come on the lot, sometimes they would ask for a modular home, and oftentimes they didn't really know the difference. They just felt like modular was better than manufactured. And it may be, it may not be. It just really depends on the how the home is constructed, the finishes, etc. So to go more into detail on this, the thing I want you to take away with, a few years ago, there was a consumer that went to Clayton Homes in Bedford. They had a lot on Smith Mountain Lake that they wanted to put a new home on. It had a single wide on it at one time, a long time ago. And that was removed, and the lot had sat vacant for a number of years. And so when they looked at it, the only thing that would really work, if you've been on the lake, you know that some of those lots come down a steep hill to get onto the lake. So the only thing that would really work was a single section home. Well, the county, Bedford County, had it zoned for modular only. So what they did is they consulted one of their factories, and they built a modular single section. So it was a single wide built to the modular code. So when it rolled in, it was a single section home that looked very much like you would call a single wide. However, it was built to the mod code. Bedford reviewed the plans, saw that it was appropriately built to the mod code, and allowed that to go forward and be set on that property. Now, I can't tell you how the neighbors felt about it, but the reality is it satisfied the code and the requirements for that lot. So that gives you some idea of the nuance between the products. So if it's a manufactured home, it is given this HUD label. It's a red tag. If it's a multi-section, you're going to have two of them, one on the front and on the front half and one on the back half. They're usually at the opposite end of the hitch. And I would recommend that anyone who purchases one of these, or you as a realtor, if you're helping to sell one, and the first thing you do is snap a photo of the HUD tag. Because you can see that plate on the right, how it starts to fade with time. And the numbers can become hard to read. So this assures you that this home was built to the HUD code and it is a manufactured home. Sometimes you'll run into those homes that were pre-76 that they weren't built to any code, and that is problematic. That's a challenge for everyone. So again, the industry tries to confuse us. If you remember, that plate that was on the outside of the home is called a label, and then there's a what I would call a label inside the house is called a plate. So go figure. This is literally just an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that's laminated and attached to the home inside the home. And it contains all kinds of important information. It has the manufacturer, the serial number, the model number, the number of the HUD labels that are on the outside of the house, the appliances that came with the home originally, and the code, the thermal zone that the home was built to, as well as the roof load and the wind speed. So all that information is on that data plate, and it will be inside the house unless the consumer has removed it. I'll just quickly go through the list of where I look for them. The first place I go is the master bedroom closet. If it's not there, I'll check the kitchen cabinet doors. Then I'll check any other bedroom closet, usually on the wall in a closet. It might be in the utility room, might be on the back of the cover of the electric panel box. If they have a nice cover on it, sometimes they'll mount it on the inside of that. And then I would lastly check any of the cabinets in the bathrooms. So that would be my order of where I look: first master bedroom and then spread out from there. So switching now to modular also gets a data plate, and it gets a tag. The tag you can see blown up on the left there. And so this is issued by the state. The Department of Housing and Community Development issues this. They call them seals. The manufacturer plans and specs have to be sent in. They usually have been pre-approved by an engineering firm. So you see that blue tag on the right, that's the firm that helped create the plans and then did the inspections at the factory to make sure that the home was built to the code for where that house is going. So this home could be built in Alabama and shipped to Virginia. It has to be built to the construction requirements of that lot. Say if it's in Albemarle County, that specific requirement for that. And what the factories do is they'll either go online to the website for the county, or they'll call their retailer and have them check to see what is the snow load for that jurisdiction. What is there anything special that has to be taken into consideration on building that product. So those seals again are issued by Department of Housing and Community Development, and this is on the inside of the house. So that identifies it as part of the industrialized building code. So that covers identification. Any questions on that? The next topic I want to cover is foundations. And this is in some ways similar to the manufactured modular. Everybody has an impression of what a permanent foundation is. The industry even has their own ideas. If a consumer asks for a permanent foundation, what exactly is it that they're asking for? But the reality is, with a manufactured home, the foundation is really the piers that the home rests on. So this is your piers here looking in cross section. So the HUD has developed a foundation guideline. However, it's pretty extreme. But part of their acknowledgement of the foundation system is they also say, you know, if you can hire your own engineer that designs something that is signed off on by the engineer and it meets the requirements of the HUD code, they'll accept it. So what all the companies do is they have their engineers perform the setup requirements for each of their houses. And they actually put it in a manual called a setup manual, which is used in the permitting process so that you can give that to the building official and say, this is how we're going to put in our footers. The home will be constructed with these loads, and that's based on the soil conditions where the house goes, and any specific site issues that need to be taken into consideration. There's some areas in Virginia where you have shrink swell that needs to be addressed. So this would be looking down on a typical plan. You have all those piers, and then in the center line where the two halves come together, you have those marriage wall piers that you see, if my mouse is working right there. So these would be their marriage line piers. Now this would be a typical footer diagram for a manufactured home. And this would be really the same for an on-frame modular. So this, in fact, becomes the foundation for the home itself, is this pier. You see the steel I-beam here with the pier column holding that in place. Typically, they're going to be about every 8 feet apart, 8 feet on center, down the underneath the steel I-beam. So the reason this is important to you folks is if you're doing resales and the consumer is trying to get a loan and they need to substantiate that the home was properly set, they need to get, depending on the loan, if it's FHA, they're going to need to have a foundation certificate. So FHA wants what they call a permanent foundation. So it's important to know that that doesn't mean you have to have a brick or block perimeter around the house. What you do have to have is a home properly anchored to the ground on those piers. And then it has to be skirted, which we'll address here in a moment. But this is a typical permanent foundation certificate that one of the engineers out of the Bedford area, his name's Clark Gibson, provides to a lot of the retailers in Virginia. And I sent a copy of this to Teresa so that you can see that in more detail. So what Clark does is he refers to the HUD code, and he'll make sure that the home is properly anchored. What we see over time sometimes is those anchor straps could get loose, or they may be rusted if there's any kind of moisture under the home. And if he sees that as a problem, then he'll make the buyer or the seller, whoever, make sure that they get proper anchors into the ground to keep that house secure, and something that he's then comfortable to sign off on. So it's an important step in the process for you in the sales process. So you'll see here on the left where this is actual language from the HUD code. And it talks about the anchoring system, and I've read through it a few times, and it is very comprehensive. But you would think you were building the New World Trade Center on top of this foundation. So that's why at the bottom you see, or structurally designed by a licensed professional engineer. So what Clark does is he relies on the engineers at the factory that come up with a system to anchor that home to the ground, and their stamp is on it. Then what he does is he verifies that the home has been set to those factory standards. The same thing is done by your building officials when they go out and inspect, but a building official is not going to necessarily come out on a resale of a home from one buyer from a seller to the buyer. So this is a good way for you to get that certification if you need it for the new buyer's lender. And there's multiple people across the state that do this. I just happen to know Clark the best, so that's why I use his. Any questions on that? It's kind of important. Okay, so let's move on to skirting then. So if the foundation is those piers, then what is the skirting? So skirting is not, it can be, but it doesn't, most times it is not load bearing because the piers are holding the weight. So the skirting literally just closes from the bottom of the house to the ground off. And the HUD code actually says that the only real purpose is to keep, the airflow out of there and to keep vermin and water from getting underneath the home. Now, I don't know how you keep mice out of houses, but anyhow, that's what the actual code says. So this here on this particular home is a CertainTeed cement board that was used as the skirting. Again, it's not structural, but it's durable, and that's one of the things that it requires. Is it's got to be the vinyl skirting that you sometimes see probably would not qualify on an FHA loan. Really shouldn't, because that's not what they're asking for. So they want something that's more durable so the consumer doesn't have an ongoing maintenance problem with something that's susceptible to wind or even animals. So now you will in some cases see a block foundation, but this image to me is helpful. This would be a split face block foundation. This goes to show you that the home's already set. All the vinyl's been put on the ends, and this wall is just coming up afterwards as a skirting wall. So it tucks up under the vinyl nicely, but it doesn't really offer much in the way of support for the home. The outsides may rest on the top of the foundation. They may drive wedges in there just to give it additional support, but the majority of the load is carried by those piers underneath the house. So enough about foundations. I'd like to talk a little bit about conversion. So this has been an issue as well in the past in Virginia for sure. So there was a law passed in 2014 which codified the proper process for converting a manufactured home to real estate. And then also in that code section is how you do it in reverse. So it's a process that your titling agents need to go through, where the title is surrendered to DMV. It's recorded at the courthouse with the serial number of the home. And that title is then relinquished and the home becomes becomes real estate and is fixed to the property. It has some requirements, the wheels and axles need to be removed, the hitches have to be gone, and has to be properly anchored to the ground. Just basic things that you would do on a normal set. But prior to 2014, there was really no process to follow to do. Everybody was doing it different. For example, I'll go back to Bedford County because I know that market pretty well. They did every double wide they said was real estate. So the title may or may not have been expired or turned in, but Bedford classified it as real estate. So when they sent out their tax bills, as a manufactured home and double wide in Bedford County, you were taxed as real estate. And so there was really no system of one county's doing it the same versus another county maybe doing it different. So now there's a proper way to classify it as real estate, to tax it as real estate, and it gives the opportunity for it to appreciate in value. If it's affixed to the land, if it's in a community or on a rental lot or on grandmother's land, if she set aside 2 acres, different story. That may not be classified as real estate, and unless the lot stands alone. But if, let's say, for example, they have 25 acres and they have a farmhouse, and then they put a manufactured home on there too, on the same 25-acre tract, it very likely will not be classified as real estate. It will remain as personal property, and that title will stay in force, and that title would be used as collateral if they were going to get financing. So I hope that helps clear that up. I sent the documents to Teresa on this as well, the DMV documents to follow. It's pretty detailed, but if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. There are some title agents who do a lot of manufactured homes and know the process very well. And then there's others who only see them every now and again and may not know all the ins and outs of it. So again, feel free if you have a case arise where you have difficulty with converting that. So these are the form numbers that tell you how to do that.
Randy,
and then
before we move on, we have 2 questions.
Sure.
One goes back, you said something about the FHA would require a skirt. What type of skirt?
It depends on the loan originator can have a say in that, but in general, if you get a professional engineer to sign off on it, they should accept his inspection of that property. So the engineer should look under the home to make sure it's properly anchored, and then that skirting wall meets that requirements of being permanent. So what is the definition of permanent, right? That's up to interpretation. So it used to be that the only thing that worked was the cinder blocks or brick, masonry. But now they recognize that, it's just a skirting wall. I mean, if you ran into it hard with the lawnmower, it's going to fall over anyhow. So it's not what's holding the house up. So as long as it's permanent in that it's not going to get blown out with just your average thunderstorm. The cement board skirting has been widely approved. Now, different professional engineers may have a different opinion on that, but I from what I have seen, they will accept the cement board siding the certainteed cement board as a good option, which is more affordable for the consumer than doing block. The trouble, Teresa, is when you had a home that was set and has been on the property for 10 years, 5 years, whatever the number of years is, and it doesn't have a block foundation, it's really hard to come and put in a block foundation after the fact. So that's why they're a little bit more lenient to use the cement board, where you don't have to put a footer in around the base of that house, but you can still satisfy those FHA requirements. So that's kind of a way to make it work for the consumer without having them to spend thousands of dollars just to put a foundation in for a loan approval. So.
Okay, and then the second question is, do modular homes have the seams on the inside walls like manufactured homes?
So I'll go back to what I said prior. It really depends on the code that the house is built to. So today, it could, to answer your question, yes, it could. But when I said that I was on a retail location and the consumer came in, said they wanted modular, I would ask them, why is it that you want modular? And some of them would say they wanted a higher pitch roof, they wanted finished sheetrock, they wanted real wood cabinets. There's a whole list of what they may have thought they were getting with the modular. But the reality is all of those can be with either product. So today, a large percentage of the manufactured homes come with finished sheetrock, but that doesn't make them modular. Just like you could do a modular with the batten stripped houses. You're not usually going to see that. That would be very rare that you would see a modular with those batten stripped houses. So most likely it's manufactured if it has the batten strips, but today, as I said, majority of even manufactured homes do not have the batten strip homes. Obviously, it costs more because it's a lot more involved in finishing to do the tape and texture inside the home and then move it down the highway at hopefully only the speed limit. So, you know, they're all hurricane tested if they get to 70 miles an hour coming down the highway. And so the sheetrock homes, they may have some cracking when they get to site around the windows and door frames, but that's easily fixed, and then you can't tell that it ever had that issue before. So you still will see batten stripped homes on the entry level houses that are out there. And the consumers are still, you know, they're very price conscious. So if they're really price conscious, they may choose one of those batten stripped houses. For me personally, the problem with them is if something happens to the panel, it's really hard to get a replacement panel for that home. Whereas if it's a traditional sheetrock home, you know, you can patch it and move on and never know that the damage had occurred. So so that's my opinion on that. So I did mention that to convert a home, the same process is in place to revert the home. So let's say that you have a client that wants to buy a property that has a double wide on it, but they either want to get a new double wide or a new modular, or they want to build on the property. So that house has to be taken off the property. There is a process to reinstate the title to that home so that that home can be then moved to another location with a title. And the buyer of that home can then either convert it or do whatever they choose with the home. So a title can be reinstated today. And there's also a process for lost titles, but it's not exactly where we'd like it to be yet today. So if you can't find a title for the home, especially if it's been the last time the home was bought, it's a previous owner and you don't know who the owner is, it's very difficult to get those titles. And that's something where we're trying to work on legislatively. And we'll probably do that with the Realtor Association this coming year. So that, Debbie and I were talking about this at the beginning, that if you're standing at the counter at DMV and they're on the other side of the counter and they can see the home that you're talking about, but they aren't able to share that information with you, it's very frustrating, because you're not the official owner of that home. You don't hold title to it. So we're trying to get some legislative language that DMV can sign off on, and that will help everybody in the process with those transactions. Obviously, the lenders want to be made whole if there's a lien on that current title. That's an issue that has to be addressed properly. But I think there is some common sense that we can make things a little bit easier when the information is staring them on a screen and they're not able to share it with you. So that's coming. We are nearing completion here. A few things again that you should know. In Virginia, we have a very strong vested rights paragraph for manufactured homes. So if a home has been properly placed on the property and then zoning's changed over the years, if it's in a manufactured home community, that can be replaced with a like manufactured home in that community. So a single section can replace a single, a double can replace a double. Now, if it's on private land, it's a little bit more flexible. So if you've got a client that wants to buy a property that has an older manufactured home on it, and they want to replace it with a new manufactured home, the code is very specific about this. You can do that. You can replace a single with a multi-section. It doesn't have to sit in the same footprint. Obviously, if it's a non-conforming right, you can't make it more non-conforming. So for example, if it has a 35-foot setback from the center line of the road and the current home is, say, 25 feet off the road, you can't encroach on that and put the new home 20 feet off. You have to maintain the non-conforming right or greater. But they cannot say you can't put a manufactured home on here. Our zoning has changed and we only allow site built on this property now. That is very clear in the code, that as long as there has been a manufactured home on the property within the last 2 years, you can replace it with a manufactured home. So sometimes projects can take a while. I wouldn't take the home off until you were pretty far along on the next one, just to avoid any situation. But that's good fuel for thought for you when you're dealing with your clients out there. Any questions on the vested rights? Lastly, the last thing I want to talk about is appreciation and depreciation, and this group knows it better than anyone. But I will just show you this graph here. This was put out by the Urban Institute, and FHFA did the study. And so you can see now that manufactured homes track pretty much along the lines of traditional homes, with one caveat, and that is if they're on land. Okay, so if they're on land, they can appreciate, because as you know, it's all about location, 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 right? So if the land is valuable and the home is kept up well, that home can appreciate just like site-built homes. Now, I have my own caveat, and I say condition, 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 because it really depends on how they took care of the home. So location is important, condition is second most important. And then we can see that those homes can appreciate. The taxing agent can increase the property taxes over time as well. So they can build wealth through manufactured homes. Now, if it's in a park on a leased land, not as likely. However, there's always an exception. And so this is a community on Long Island, and it's called Montauk Shores. And I believe this is the most expensive single wide sold. So it was an 800 square feet home, recently sold for 3.75 million. So now that's a single wide. This is their view right here out the doors. So obviously they were buying the location. It's a rented lot. They still have to pay rent on the lot. But they had the money to do it and they wanted to be in that location. It's really hard to be on that eastern shore of Long Island. And so that just goes to prove that it's worth what somebody is willing to pay for it. Originally that home probably cost under 10,000, just to give you an idea. So and then the last thing I would just mention is resale. If you are involved with resale, it can be challenging on the finance side. And if you're having trouble finding a lender to finance that sale, feel free to reach out to us. We do have lenders that are members. And the HUD guidelines that those inspectors will follow is if it's over 1 year old, it must meet the intent of the requirements that were set out by HUD. So that's what they're going to inspect. Those anchors, are those straps tight underneath the home? Is it dry underneath the home? Is it have a permanent skirting around the outside? So, and we'll finish up with that and ask if there are any questions, anything that you would like to know in more detail that I didn't cover.
Candace, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, sure. So I had a question about different types of earthen homes or utilizing foundations like, tire foundations or earth bag foundations, and how earthen homes are considered in all of this.
That is out of my expertise, Candace. I don't know. I don't have any experience with that. So I really can't shed any light on it. My specialty is built in a factory and shipped to a site.
Have you seen where people will take, so I've got some clients that are doing this currently in typically Albemarle County primarily. But they're acquiring homes, either modular or manufactured, and having them built and put on foundations that are either, dirt packed tire foundation. There's one in Albemarle County that is, and or taking the modular manufactured home and partially burying it and then having like an earthen roof and things like that. So I didn't know if you have come across or seen any codes or like putting a modular manufactured home on a foundation that is then encapsulated or included in the earth.
So I don't have any personal experience, but what I would default to is it has to be signed off by somebody. So it would go back to a professional engineer that has agreed that the system that they're using to attach the home to the ground follows those guidelines to keep moisture out of the house. So that's have to be addressed and then securely fastened to the ground for both down loads. It has longitudinal, latitudinal, and uplift loads are all required. And then that is reviewed with the building inspector of that jurisdiction. And if it's signed off by an engineer and then installed per the engineer's guidelines, then that's his certificate that's on the line with that house. And the inspector is just checking to make sure that the way it was set is in line with what the engineer designed. So that would be my guidance to you on that. So if they're doing their own system, that would be up to the building inspector if he would approve their method of attaching the home to the land. Even if it's buried, they still have those issues to address.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anything else, Teresa?
No, I don't see any more questions, but anyone that has a question can definitely unmute and go ahead and ask.
Yeah, okay.
And Randy, if
And-
you could send me that presentation so I can send it out to everyone, that would be great.
Sure. And as I mentioned, feel free to reach out to me with questions regarding transactions or resources, all that. If I don't know it, I can probably find somebody who does. So again, feel free and as you're going about your job out there to reach out.
Okay. Well, Randy, thank you so much. I know I've learned a lot. We appreciate your time and your expertise. And I hope everybody has a great day and a fabulous weekend.
My
Thanks,
pleasure.
everyone. That was
Take care.
great.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Thanks a lot. Bye.